Sound check, track route subcommittee.
Good morning. As we have quorum present for today's meeting, I'd like to call this meeting of the Truck Route Subcommittee to order. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. In council chambers today, we have Councillor Jackson, Councillor Kassar, Councillor M. Wilson, Councillor Kretsch, Councillor A. Wilson virtually, and myself as chair. We're going to go through the approval of the agenda. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as presented? Councillor Kassar, Councillor Kretsch. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda as presented? That's unanimous. Thank you. That vote was carried. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Not seeing any. We'll go to the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, which was on September 13th, 2022. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the previous minutes? Councillor Jackson, Councillor Kassar. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor? That's unanimous. The vote's carried. Going to items for information. 7.1 PED 19073E, the Truck Route Monitoring and Evaluation Framework. Steve Malloy, Manager, Transportation Planning Services, is here to provide committee with a presentation on this item. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Councillor, and Happy New Year to everyone. Appreciate your time today to go through this presentation. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Back in 2022, the new policy relating to the Truck Route Master Plan was approved by Council, which established refined truck network, which essentially the desired outcome of that network was to shift a lot of the trucks from the downtown area in Lower City to the Ring Road through the Red Hill Valley Parkway and Lincoln Alexander Parkway. So the direction from the September 2022 Truck Route Subcommittee was to report back through monitoring of the criteria that was approved at that committee. As well, in this presentation, there was a direction from the May 15th, 2024 GIC looking at the goods movement strategy to incorporate some more equitable evaluation in terms of the truck route monitoring, as well as that study as well. So next slide, please. So this chart is really what was in the 2022 report that was approved by the subcommittee, which had a number of steps. Essentially, we're at step number 3, where it kind of we implemented the signage. There were some issues, and when that rolled out, so it kind of delayed some of the data collection. And then we collected some data, and it's presented in this report. And then the next step, once we establish this data, is to do additional public and stakeholder engagement around that, and then moving forward to further evaluate the truck route network, and if any modifications required in the short term, or when we do the next update of the truck route master plan. Next slide, please. So the 3 major pillars is community livability, environmental and public health, and economic prosperity, which again aligned with the principles that were established as part of the truck route master plan, and is also embedded as part of the transportation master plan for the city. Next slide. So looking at community livability, and again, the desired outcome to shift the trucks, and essentially when we're talking about trucks, it's the heavy trucks that were 5 axles or more out of the downtown area to the Upper Red Hill, sorry, I keep saying Upper Red Hill Valley Parkway, Red Hill Valley Parkway and the Lincoln Alexander Parkway. And essentially what we found was there has been some successes. There has been some decline in the number of trucks. There has also been some decline in the trucks that are 4 axles or less throughout the Wellington and Victoria Street corridors. We did collect data for Main Street and King Street. However, that data, there were some anomalies in that data, and we didn't think it was fair to provide that as there was some construction activity that could have changed the results. So it wasn't really a fair number to bring forward, but as we move forward, for future monitoring, we would for sure make sure that the quality of that data is good and can be presented and to understand those impacts as well. But anecdotally, I've noticed a decline in there, not 100% compliance for sure, but certainly there has been an improvement along those corridors as well. And as expected, there has been an increase in that volume onto the Lincoln Alexander Parkway and the Red Hill Valley Parkway which is the desired outcome that we're looking for. The one interesting finding, though, is the 4 axles or less. There was a decrease on the Red Hill Valley Parkway, which the only thing I could surmise is the activity around the Red Hill Business Park itself and the different activity levels. That could be the destination and perhaps using the link itself more so than the Red Hill Valley Parkway. Next slide. In terms of community livability, 2 other important items is the collision data. We have the before collision data, but unfortunately, post implementation of the network, there hasn't been any collision data made available to us in 2024. That information should be available to us in the next couple of months. And obviously, once we have that information, that can be shared and see what the impacts are, understand that data. So we don't really have any after implementation data for collisions itself. In terms of enforcement, there has been now a traffic services division that is dealing a lot with enforcement, not only of compliance to the truck route network itself, but also commercial vehicle safety. And I think the good news story out of this is, well, good and bad news, I suppose. The good news is that there's been almost 600 commercial vehicles ticketed and 180, almost 30% taken out of service, which tells you the issue of having safe trucks on the road and unsafe trucks, but the success of the traffic services division for doing that work and to identifying that problem and removing those out of service on the roadways. And in total, over 2,000 charges have been made in relation to commercial motor vehicles. So enforcement, again, is not just the compliance of the truck routes themselves, but also the safety of vehicles. The one challenge, and we'll get into this later in the presentation, is getting additional information from the divisions that are outside of the traffic services division itself, so from the crime units, who also do enforcement, and this data is solely and strictly relating to the traffic services unit. Next slide, please. As part of our evaluation, we had a relationship with our digital officer to flag a company that could do some air quality measurements for us to kind of look at the comparison of phase 1 and phase 2. And as you can see, kind of by the colorfulness of the chart, and the phase 2 is really telling you where the shift kind of aligns with the traffic volumes that shift in ozone and other contributing issues have shifted primarily from the lower city out into the Red Hill. Next slide, please. In terms of noise, there has been counterintuitive, I think, and again, full disclosure, I'm not a noise expert, but it appears that noise has been increasing along all the corridors that we had sensors located. My understanding, though, of noise, it may not be the source. It could be lots of ambient noise. It could be construction issues. It could be increasing volumes on parallel routes as noise travels. That could be impacting results. So it's not necessarily 100% attributed to trucks, but we could, assume that with the less truck volumes, there would be less noise. But of course, each individual street could have specific issues that relating to noise. Next slide, please. This information is probably not a whole heck of a lot new because it was presented as part of the goods movement study that was presented back in May. But not surprisingly, the intensity of truck movements tend to be at our employment areas and along the provincial highway network. Based on the data we could see online, the Hamilton-Oshawa Port Authority continues to grow, and there has been an increase in shipping activity. So the impact of the removal of the network through the lower city still hasn't really impacted the viability of the port. In terms of truck flows themselves, the origin destination, there's still a lot of, the majority of the flow is either going to the GTA area, about 54%. Meanwhile, the Southwest Ontario is approximately 34%. So that's 88% of the trucks are local trucks to Ontario, to our markets there. In terms of the potential modifications or updates to the goods movement strategy itself, there is in Appendix C some potential updates that could occur, and that includes more broader community partnerships and looking at improving equity, more sustainable goods movement practices, and the sharing of information. Next slide, please. These next couple of slides, these are the things I think are more in interest and importance. This is that the enforcement, it's not really enforcement, but the violations tool, the feedback from the community, and kind of getting that crowdsourcing of people on the ground and what their experiences are, and communicating with that. Certainly, when we dig into some of the information, you can certainly tell in the Glanbrook area with the lack of a network through there, coupled with some construction projects, there has been some deviation through that community, and the map really paints the picture of where the complaints are coming from. A lot of taking Whitechurch and Miles Road and Nebo Road as well. And again, as part of the lower city, a lot of the bubble there is kind of relating to the York Boulevard construction project, where there has been deviation of trucks as part of that. So there is kind of weighted through some complaints relating to those works. So certainly the one thing to note is there is no, if one person wants to put in a lot of comments regularly, they're engaged, and that's great. That may impact the numbers and volume. So it's not the kind of, the respondents aren't different, unique comments. They're just combined comments of all those who provide it. And again, the majority of the concerns is relating to trucks on non-designated routes, as well as some driver behavior. Next slide, please. In terms of some successes and challenges, in terms of the impact, I think it's kind of clear that there has been some positive gains in achieving what we wanted to achieve and shifting where the truck volumes have been going. Certainly, the other thing is, I think the reporting tool has been successful in validating some of those concerns and listening to the community on a regular basis of where their issues are. I think next steps is looking at how to dig deeper into that data, and if there's some items that are actionable in terms of physical measures that may need to be installed that will help reinforce that enforcement through design and not necessarily relying on police services to do enforcement, and to really flag these areas and opportunities that we can integrate as part of our ongoing capital works program or individual studies that need more follow-up. And again, in terms of enforcement, I think there's been some progress in that and some good news. I think, again, more opportunities to have the traffic safety unit work with the other divisions and crime units get better data. The more data and the better data we can have, the more well-informed we are in how to improve those enforcement practices and education tools or engineering that's maybe required. Next slide, please. In terms of the challenges, again, something we're aware of and we want to continue to work on. Usually the truck drivers themselves, anecdotally, are hearing from Hamilton Police that this is where Google Maps or Apple Maps took me, not necessarily recognizing that it is or isn't a truck route. So there's opportunities to either work with these mapping providers to incorporate our truck route network into those mapping systems, as well as working with the Ministry of Transportation in their Ontario 511 application to include our mapping system and restrictions. So that's something that we continue to work forward on. The other important thing is the construction projects, quite clearly improving coordination and communications as part of our construction management and detour plans, to include how we address truck routes as part of that. Because if I'll even use Rymal Road as an example as well. If there's trucks are using that road, if there's limited capacity there, or if there's construction going on, they're going to deviate. And how do you manage goods movement and trucks through construction zones as well? So it's a challenge, but something I think there's room for improvement on. And then the other thing is, road network improvements itself. Recognizing that some of the issues may be because there's a lack of a network that can support roads or the trucks. So whether it's built to a standard that could accommodate heavy trucks, or again, if there's, I'll use Rymal Road as another example. If you go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes to 4 lanes, and that reduced capacity, trucks may deviate, associate that. And I think that may be one of the contributing factors to the issue in Glanbrook. And again, as I mentioned, continued enforcement through design, as well as working with Hamilton Police to continue to improve the enforcement practices and education, and how we can move forward. So that concludes my presentation, and welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, Steve. I don't have a list. I'm just going to start and come up the lane this way, and then we're going to end off with Councillor Wilson on track, and then we'll go back. So Councillor Jackson, do you have anything you'd like to express?
I sure do, Chairman Taddison. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Manager Malloy and Director Hollingworth, for this, I guess, approximately 2-year update, looking at the minutes when we last met and approved the truck route revised master plan from near the end of the last term of council, which I was on. And I know the Chair Taddison, I know the Ward 1 and 2 councillors will be jumping in right after me to thanking me profusely for the Ward 6 support of the revised truck route master plan that has helped downtown neighborhoods, helped downtown wards, that has taken a lot of the dangerous 18-wheelers off of those localized streets where schools and parks and libraries are. And so I was happy to support that. It was the right thing to do. I hope people are detecting I'm being both serious and a little bit facetious when I say that. Anyways, so this all points for me in the direction that eventually we need to, as is pointed out on the charts, slide 5 and 11, we need to look at the improvements, capacity improvements on the Red Hill Valley Parkway and the link. So I'd like to ask if I could, Chair Taddison, through you, to either Manager Malloy or Director Hollingworth, In light of council's, I think it was unanimous support last month, one of the last things we did with the motion from Councillor Spatafora, giving staff the authority to further investigate and explore the feasibility of expansions of Link and Red Hill. Any commentary on that and the status of where that stands? And subsequent to that, Chair Taddison, also subsequent to that as well, how are discussions going with the MTO and the pinch points at the 403 and the QEW? Through you, Chair Taddison, please.
Okay, who wants to take that? Thank you, Steve.
Through the chair, thank you, Councillor, for those comments. We are moving forward with our staff report to bring forward in Q1 the results of the technical study that was done for the feasibility of the Red Hill and Link. So that will be forthcoming to share that information. In terms of the communication with MTO, I think we had initial conversations with them to introduce that study itself, but I think more fruitful conversations will be had once we progress through future phases of the environmental assessment process to identify those things. One potential improvement to help facilitate the overall network and alleviate some of the background volume could be the Mohawk ramp reintroduction at Rousseau that could have some system, not because it's not a truck route, it wouldn't have any impact on the truck itself. But certainly the more network redundancy that we have certainly has potential to improve the overall transportation system.
I appreciate that update, Manager Malloy. Through you, Chair Taddison. I think under Director Kennedy in engineering, she's overseeing the environmental assessment for the expansion of Rymel from where we left off about 6-7 years ago, from Dartnall all the way over to West 5th, where it's still the 3 lanes, one east, one west, with the middle turning lane. And I've been a strong advocate, like I have been for the Lincoln Red Hills expansion, for the expansion of Rymel. And so do either one of you, even though it's under the purview of Director Kennedy, either one of you, Director Hollingworth or Manager Malloy, can give even a cursory update on that environmental assessment and possibly a staff report coming forward? If not, Chair Taddison, then maybe the two gentlemen can pass that along to Director Kennedy. Through you, Chair Taddison, please.
Through the chair. I will confirm the timing of that through engineering services. However, it's my understanding that there will be a report coming back in 2025.
Fantastic. Thank you, Manager Malloy. I'm curious what I saw on slide 5, Chair Taddison. HSR, it seems to be now we have redirected and, or if you will, forced greater number of HSR buses onto the Lincoln Red Hill. Can staff, Manager Malloy, confirm, did I interpret that correctly from slide 5? Or because I thought I've seen HSR buses on both transportation corridors for years, but is there now an increased number of the buses using them? Through you, Chair Taddison, please.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Through the chair, Councillor, so that number really represents that the HSR buses are inclusive in that number. So it doesn't represent an increase in HSR buses themselves. Is that because of the length of the bus, it would be considered a 5-axle vehicle because the counters that we have don't count the axles themselves. It counts the length of the vehicle, which potentially could have 5 axles. So the articulated buses on those corridors would be counted as a 5-axle vehicle, although recognizing it doesn't technically have 5 axles because due to the length.
Thanks for clarifying. One last comment, Chair Taddison. In light of the fact with our new procedures, I guess nobody can speak a second time. Anyways, forget it. I would just once again put my plea out, as Manager Malloy and Director Hollingworth especially know, on the Kenilworth access, still, in light of the revised policy to put them on the ring roads, the odd 18-wheeler is cheating and wanting to sneak through coming upbound, southbound. So I just would ask for increased signage at Main Street on Kenilworth Avenue South. In Councillor Huang's ward, I would just ask for increased signage that this is a banned truck route coming up to Kenilworth access and greater communication to the trucking industry. I know I've asked this before, you gentlemen have followed through, and I would just ask for an increased amount as we're as everything is moving in the direction as it should be with the revised truck route master plan. And if I'm just seeing some affirmative nods from the two gentlemen, then that's good enough for me. Thanks for your indulgence, Chair Taddison.
Thanks, Councillor Jackson. You can follow up with that later with the two gentlemen through your office. Okay. Councillor Kassar, did you have anything to
I
add?
do have some questions, yeah.
Okay,
Maybe
carry
just
on.
through you, Chair, to the clerk, just on confirmation on the policy Councillor Jackson just referenced around speaking twice and how it relates to subcommittees versus council.
So the policy that was referenced relates to council.
Yeah, so it does not apply.
Thank you, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, you caught me off guard there.
Yep, on for a second.
I know. Carry on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
So, yeah, through you, Chair. So thank you also for the presentation. I'm going to focus some questions just on how we look at this from a higher level and measure success. So lots of obviously measurements in here, percentages increase, number of truck speeds, all that kind of thing. What I think is hard for me and certainly would be hard for the public is to, and for I think ourselves as a city, how do we determine how we're doing and what our targets are and are we successful or not? There's not really any kind of dashboard here. So a first question would be, and maybe I'll have some follow-up, is that envisioned? And if not, how do we go about doing that so we can understand how we're doing and where the gaps are? Through you.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Through the chair, I'll take a first stab at that. So I think perhaps I wasn't really clear. I think in general, looking at the community livability thing, and that was really a driving factor when we established the new truck route network, and looking at where we want to direct that volume of traffic, especially for the most vulnerable in the lower city. It has been successful. I think the other important tool, like any other policy change, it takes time. So part of my answer is it's still a little bit unclear because we still have some work to do. I think whenever you're dealing with trucks, nobody really, when you're living next to a truck, really like a truck. So from that perspective, I think this getting more into the weeds of the violation tool and understanding where those issues and for me, complaints and that feedback from the community is a good measurement of how well we are doing. I know anecdotally, our office has not received a lot of direct, our complaints have gone down since the implementation of the new network. So to me, that is one indicator. But the violation tool and identifying those hotspots also tell me what's working well and what's not working well and the implications of that. I think really, and that's why those successes and the challenges are really how we're doing right now in this state and time and where we need to do additional work. So certainly we need some work to do, but I think we're getting closer, and I think I think we're trending in a positive direction. Are we there yet? I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we're trending in a positive direction. And at least we're using these measures to identify what challenges we need to do to keep trending in that positive direction.
Just a quick commentary. Brian Hollingworth, Director of Transportation Planning and Parking. I think it's a good question, and I would view this as kind of a first cut at the monitoring, because there's other indicators like community livability and are these areas which have less trucks and less noise and vibration starting to revitalize and thrive more, and those take a little bit longer to measure. But I think, I can't help but think about the framework that was recently approved for measuring some of the impacts of LRT. And I think there's some good analogies to draw with that framework. So it's something that we should definitely put on our radar, that this is not the end.
Okay.
Councillor Kassar.
Thank you for that supplemental. So appreciate that. And I would push us even further because a comment was made, think we're doing better and we're getting there. And if I'm putting myself in the seat of a resident who deals or is concerned about truck traffic, has truck traffic in the neighborhood, would want to know what is the city's objective, what does success look like on certain elements, and how are we achieving it? Are we not achieving it? And over time, how does that fluctuate? And what are the gaps that we need to improve on? So totally have confidence that staff understand what needs to be done. I think what we often lack, Chair, is communicating to the public on what our objectives are and being clear on, is it red, yellow, green, simple dashboard on different elements, similar to what Director Hollingworth said about the LRT. But I think we really, maybe we need direction, happy to put that forward, to have some kind of public-facing dashboard that can articulate to the public, this is what we're trying to achieve, and here's how we're doing, because then that allows a conversation on, are our goals aggressive enough? Or are they too aggressive? Do they have negative impacts to, the trucking industry or whatever? I don't know. I'm not trying to bias anything, but right now there's lots of data and it's really hard to synthesize. Us having a report, spending time reading it, staff knowing it, maybe we can kind of get it, but anyone outside this room really isn't going to be able to synthesize that. So, I think I'll put some thought into maybe direction there, but I think that's really, really important, and doesn't really just apply to this committee, but more generally in the city. So I'll leave that. I do have other questions if I can still.
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
So going along that theme on slide 12, under the challenges and opportunities, the first box was around, you mentioned the Ontario 511 application, and then Google and Apple Maps driving traffic in the wrong direction. We've had that in the old Dundas Road, old Ancaster Road corridor too, where traffic gets routed through there because of apps. So first of all, Ontario 511, could you just give a quick overview on what that is, what the benefit would be? And I'd also like to understand, do we have a timeline that we're trying to achieve? Because we're working on it is good, but we achieve things when we have goals and hold ourselves accountable. Through you, Chair.
So through the chair, so Ontario 511 is a app that the Ministry of Transportation has been trying to drive a lot of people to use. That really is a navigational tool for motorists to identify any construction projects that the ministry may be doing, the goods movement network, connecting to destinations. The primary objective of the ministry, it's a provincial mandate for them to do this, so they're focused on provincial matters. We've have had conversations with them that it's in provincial interest for all goods movement from local communities, not just from the province's network, that are important. So I think our challenge, we continue to fight the fight and advocate. The challenge is the different mandates from the different organizations and what you're trying to achieve, and some technical pushbacks, because our truck route network also have time restrictions. So it may not be as simple to say, here's a full-time truck route, or here's our, is the issue with the part-time truck routes that they seem to have with the mapping. So if there's ways to overcome them, if we need to present that these are easy fixes, we'll continue to advocate and push for that. But ultimately, it's the ministry's domain and decision-making to implement these or not. So that's kind of where we're at with those discussions. But we continue to have them, not just from my office, but also from economic development as well.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then Chair, just similarly around Google and Apple Maps and whatnot, obviously that's out of our control as well, but there are things that we can do. Potentially, do we know other municipalities who have had success, or other organizations? Is that work being done? I'm just interested in seeing that there's actions that with a timeline and specificity in what we're doing, so that we can hold ourselves accountable. Through you, Chair.
Through the chair. So in terms of other municipalities, we actually are a leader. So a lot of municipalities are coming to us and asking us how are we doing things. But in terms of a timeline, it's tough to give you an exact timeline to be held accountable to, because it's something that we're ongoing. But certainly that's something, to me, it seems like it's a low-hanging fruit if we can get to the right people to communicate to have this mapping feature. A lot of the private industries, of course, are driven by what's their market for it. So if that's something that if we can, through economic development and my office can kind of, hey, if there's a market push, if there's a desire from a business community to have this integration, because maybe they have less tickets, so it doesn't cost them as much if they, so there has to be that market push as well as a governmental push.
Yeah, thank you. And just a closing comment then, just on that last point, obviously we can't control the outcome because it's private interest, but we can control our actions and what we're doing to advocate. So that's what I'm speaking of, just to be clear. And then in terms of direction on dashboard, I'll put together some language on potential direction for committee's consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor M. Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. Two things before I get into my questions. I think at the time, and worthy of repetition here, is I did give thanks to elected members who have the privilege of representing residents outside the downtown core, including Councillor Jackson. I think it was a demonstration of what I hold to be true, and that is it's in our shared interest to advocate for the youngest and the most vulnerable amongst us. I think it's in our self-interest. So thank you for that, then and continuously. Just anecdotally, I know in speaking with residents, particularly in the Strathcona neighborhood, these are conversations that happen at the farmer's market or in the park. They are not folks who are in regular contact with the Ward 1 office. But without fail, they have expressed great pleasure and satisfaction, and they have noticed a difference in their day-to-day lives. So I think that is a win, and it's sometimes hard to quantify that, but their house doesn't rumble. It just the overwhelming sense of just being overwhelmed by the rumble and the roar, it just leads to a better everyday life. So great, thank you. My questions, I just want to make sure a couple of comments, Steve, that you made twice. One was in reference on slide 6, and it was later in your presentation. And I just want to make sure I understood what you were referring to. You were talking about the divisions within the corporation and perhaps also in our partners at Hamilton Police Service for the need for better coordination or integration of systems or practice or monitoring, and I wasn't quite clear on what you were referencing through the chair.
Steve?
So through the chair, unfortunately, Sergeant Barnes isn't here to speak to that specifically. And my comment was more toward the data collected by the police services in general. And I think the traffic safety unit is a separate unit, so it's not part of the divisions. Mm-hmm. So I think the division officers also do truck enforcement. They also issue tickets for speeding or maybe not being on the truck route. And I think there's a little bit, but it kind of goes into a vacuum. It's my understanding that there needs to be availability of that data to supplement the amount of tickets that they're providing from the traffic services unit, or safety unit. So I think the numbers that I've presented in this report are already underrepresenting the amount of enforcement that's taken place because the divisional numbers are not available to include into this data. So this data is specifically to that one unit.
So, Chair, just to make sure I understand then, so if just as an example, on slide 6, under the title of enforcement, sorry, my apologize. My question, Chair, just to repeat it, was just to make sure I understood what Mr. Malloy said. Under the enforcement referenced on slide 6, the 300 charges, where is that number coming from? And you're saying it's an underreporting because we're not sharing, our systems are not sharing information between the service?
So through the chair, again, I probably can't, not the best person to articulate how the information is collected through Hamilton Police Services, but the data that is presented is only the data represented by the traffic safety unit. It does not reflect the other policing divisions within the city that also do truck route or any kind of traffic kind of violation tickets. So that number would be above and beyond what's presented here today.
Okay, so that I understand, this number is from the HPS, but it's from their traffic safety unit. And you're saying that it's likely conservative because there are other police service members who also are in the enforcement, active in enforcement. It's not their sole duty, but it may be as a consequence of them being out and about or whatever. Is that a fair?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm looking for some assurance that on the online enforcement tool, we've just had a little bit of fuzziness at our end that the Hamilton Police Service are using the results of that reporting to inform their enforcement, and that there is well coordination between the city administration and the Hamilton Police Service. My hope was, Chair, that if there is a repeat offender, we can ascertain that it may be a design issue. It may be just a mapping issue to Councillor Kazar's point, or something else. Like there may be something there that we're missing, and I'm just hoping to receive some assurance from you that online information is informing all of our activities, including the service. Thank you.
Through the chair, I can confirm that the Hamilton Police Services and our section are communicating. They do have access to the information. And again, it is informing some of their patrols, what they can do, as well as we are taking that information, again, to do the next step to identify some of those enforcement issues or the more engineering issues that we can address in the future.
Thank you. Chair, I have one last question. I wasn't going to raise it today, but I do think it is within the purview of this committee, especially since my colleague at the end of the table initiated the conversation about the link and the expressway. Do we know, or will it be forthcoming in the work of how much of the volume that are on those two routes is commercial in nature?
So through the chair, yes, there will be a distinction of what is commercial vehicle traffic and passenger traffic through any data that's collected for those roadways.
Thank you. Through the chair, do we have any of that data at all available, or was it ever collected at some point? It obviously may have changed, particularly in light of this truck route, but do we have any of that at all?
Through the chair, we do have that data. I do not have that at my fingertips at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I just, I'm thinking there has been much chatter, Chair, about the Government of Ontario's musings that it's going to be building, spending billions of dollars and building a highway underground in and around Toronto. And I think there was a suggestion that if there's issues of capacity, perhaps it might be advantageous for the 407, which is presently tolled, to invite and maybe be for the exclusive use of commercial traffic. If public assets are going to be there to uphold private commercial business, maybe that might be a good, prudent thing to do. But I look forward to having those numbers available in the future. Thank you.
So through the chair, my apologies, Councillor. I seem to recall we do have those numbers. It's actually on table 2 of page 5 of the report. So in that graphic, it kind of tells you the historical in the parentheses under the 5 axles or more between 2019 and 2022. The percentage of 5 axles or more was 4.2% of the total traffic on the link, and then that increased to 5.5% when we did the post in 2023. Again, for the link itself, it was 3.8%. It was 4 axles or less for trucks. So we have them separated out. We didn't combine them. And then in 4 axles or less, it was about 3.5% in 2023. So that volume, the total volume increased, but the relative percentage kind of decreased. So it's one of those things of lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's the total number has increased because over time and post-pandemic, the volumes have increased, but the relative percentage of volumes have decreased a little bit. In terms of the Red Hill, 5 axles or more, between 2019 and 2022, it was 3.2%, which have increased percentage-wise to 6%. So it has almost doubled, and that almost reflective, not quite double, but the real volume has increased quite a bit on the Red Hill. And then for the 4 axles, interestingly enough, the 4 axles or less was about 4.1% during that time, and then it reduced down to 3.2%, and the real number of 4 axles or less actually decreased. Yeah. So there's these numbers going around, but there has been generally an increase in the 5 axles along those roadways. But we can get more definitive numbers, and as we come forward in that next report, we can make a note to really clarify the commercial vehicle traffic volumes on those roadways.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Great observations, great questions, and great feedback from the downtown about the anecdotal pieces that you're hearing in the parks. Councillor Kretsch.
Thanks, and thanks for the report and for the information to get a sense of what is happening, and thanks for the presentation. I think that we are still missing some information because of trying to get more in 2025. I think people have outlined what that is. Now, Councillor Jackson asked a question about getting a specific sign. I don't think this is the time to be like making sign requests. I have such a long list, we'd be here all day, of different questions and things for sign changes. So I'm bringing a motion to Public Works to be able to say, can we evaluate how this is actually working and what the implementation looks like? So I've heard from a number of community members in Ward 2 who've taken the time to go on bike, go on cars, and go all around and test the entire truck route out. And they took me on a drive just before the holidays where we looked at all the different kind of signage issues, some of those being the 403 and not having adequate signage there. I know it's up to us, but we can advocate for that signage. Places where there's green signs that don't quite make sense, places where language is missing, areas where there ought to be signage, for instance, signage where we're trying to encourage people to use the Claremont access or things like that. We're missing signage to be able to do that. So there's a long list of things, and I've sent this over to Director Hollingworth last year in sort of anticipation of eventually having this meeting. And I think right now we need to have some engagement or some kind of way of getting out there, creating a list, having staff weigh in on the list of changes that need to be made, and then making those changes, including community feedback. So Public Works, I'm going to bring forward a motion just saying, hey, I think we need to get some feedback about how the implementation has been going, because there are a number of other issues. And the reason I didn't bring it here is simply because of the holiday shutdown and the time this meeting changed, and I couldn't do it in time with staff's thoughts. I'll be bringing it to Public Works to say when this report is on the Public Works agenda to bring that here, and then the report would come back to the Trug Route Subcommittee for a review here, whatever that looks like. But the goal would be to try and have some more conversations with people in the community, because no matter where we are in the city, and I think in every single ward we see where the truck's operating, everyone's been saying there are issues with the signage. Like there's been a pretty clear thing. I think we put the signage out there thinking this is going to probably be good, it's going to work, and then we wanted to wait and see what the reaction would be and how it would actually have impacts. Because right now I think it just can be very confusing for people about what to do, regardless of what we have, and for Google and those kinds of things. I know that's another issue that people have raised a lot, are issues about whether or not we can get Google to help us with some of these things, whether or not the ministry is going to let us make changes to signage on 403, that kind of stuff. But just at a really high level, just so people have a sense of what I'm talking about, we're really talking about things like making sure signage locations are targeted based on the data we have, right? Where truck origins are. Right now, we don't have signage in all those places where truck origins are. And so how are we going to make sure we get that signage in places where we know trucks are entering the city? Also wanting to make sure that we have signage entrances to zones where 4-axle trucks are not allowed. So sometimes we don't have signage in all those places where 4-axle trucks are not allowed. And the truck axle signage, which I understand is positive, where we have these green colors, doesn't also say like ends or starts, right? Sometimes we need to have some more language on these signs to be able to make it clear what's happening. Right now we have a bit of an awkward spot in Ward 2 at Wellington where, you know, you have this turnaround zone on Ferry. When you get there though, to the stop sign, we're missing a sign saying, by the way, if you accidentally found yourself, here's a truck, right? You're gonna need to turn left to get out of here. We don't have a sign there kind of explaining at that moment or that point of entry that cars ought to turn left there. So what happens is if they keep driving down Wellington past Ferry, they suddenly find themselves in a place where it's kind of saying they shouldn't be there, but they may not know because there is positive truck guidance ahead for other reasons. So there's this tension for trucks and for people being like, I don't get this, I don't understand it. There are some areas where there's just sign pollution, right? Where we see places where there's just so many other kinds of signs in the area that we have to maybe move signs. So I think that's part of what I'm hearing from people. And I think also, I am hearing from people positive things like we are seeing some less traffic from trucks in certain areas, right? Especially the data is showing us on Wellington's an example of that. But the enforcement piece isn't going to go anywhere until we do enforcement by design. So I think you appreciate you bringing that up because without having that conversation, we're going to continue to have problems on Cannon Street. That's an issue that we have a lot is problems on Cannon Street are going to remain until we start to find a way to change the shape of the city to have less accommodation. And then I hope eventually get back to that conversation about the ring road, which we kind of left off in the last term. You remember my cute delegation on the subject of let's just use the ring road, I think was the entire delegation. But I'm hoping we can have that conversation. But anyways, the point is, I think it's important for us to have a report to holistically look at the different changes we want to make, adding signs, taking signs away, changing signs. Now that we've had this out there for a couple of years and we've got good practices in place. So I've sent that off to Director Ryle because the transportation folks are the ones who are in charge of signage and hope to bring that to Public Works and then eventually have a report come back here. Otherwise, thanks for the report. I think it's important to get this update.
So no questions, Councillor Kretsch? Well, thank you for that, I guess, plea for a grassroots signage improvement strategy that seeks lots of public input. Okay. Councillor A. Wilson.
Yeah, I do have some questions. Thank you, Chair Taddison. Just to start off, though, I think there's a lot of synergy between the direction that Councillor Cassar proposed with respect to talking about what our goals are and making sure the public's aware of our goals, and what Councillor Kretsch is getting at, which is consulting the public on what our goals should be. And so just noting there, I think there's a deep synergy there, and that's exciting. The questions I have are mostly about enforcement and just trying to understand what the actual process is. And so first off is, what is the charge that these 300 plus charges have gotten? Like, what is the actual activity happening? Is it a fine that's being given out? Is it a bylaw violation? Are there demerit points being added to people's license? What's the actual 300 what's are happening?
Do you guys have that information, or is that a police answer?
So through the chair, the police could answer most of it. So I think that could be something we can come back to. But I know that the 300 charges, or the 300 charges relating to the truck route bylaw is relating to the bylaw itself. And so that's what it's relating to, is basically being whether it's kind of lumped in together, whether they're on a non-designated route or they're traveling during a period of time when they're not supposed to be on it. So if it's a 7 to 7 and they're traveling at 8 o'clock, then they should get a ticket. If it's 8 p.m. and that's 7 p.m. So I think those are whatever it's in our truck route map that identifies the designation and the timing of the designation, that's what those charges would be relating to. And police services are really the only ones who could enforce the Highway Traffic Act. So it's not a bylaw, or bylaw enforcement wouldn't be able to do moving violations. So, and the other thing of note is when the police services are enforcing, they're not just enforcing the bylaw, but they're also looking at commercial vehicle safety. And I think that's the really good news about this enforcement, is they're not just looking at from a routing perspective, but also the safety of vehicles on the roadways and the progress and the importance of that to make our community safer.
Thank you, and I appreciate both the answer, but the offer for a follow-up. I think the reason I'm asking is because it's not up to anyone here. It's up to the HPS officer doing that pullover, that inspection, to use their discretion as to what charges might be appropriate, whether it's a bylaw fine for a moving vehicle violation. But my understanding is that the MTO says not following the signage of a road is a moving vehicle offense that can be up to 2 demerit points worth. And so I guess I'm just making sure that within the violations we're using, there's discretion as to what charge is actually being laid. Is it a charge that's under a $150 fine that the companies are telling drivers, oh, don't worry, take the faster route, we'll pay your charge anyway? Or is it a demerit point that is a long-lasting, on a record, actually has an impact on driver behavior because the company can't pay off someone's demerit points? We don't control that discretion that the HPS is using, but I'd like to understand how they're using their discretion when it comes to this enforcement. And so wondering if for future information could be brought back. But as my understanding would be, not following a truck route sign is not following a sign of the road, and therefore would be eligible for potentially stronger enforcement. Through you, Chair, I'm just wondering if that can, like, the parameters on how that might come back, or if there's some dialogue with HPS. Just wondering if that can come back, if there's any concern with that coming back. And then I do have another question that's on a different trend.
Director Hollingsworth.
Yeah, through the chair, I did look at this a few months ago. I don't want to state the number because I might be off a little bit, but it's certainly not hundreds of dollars. I thought it was a fairly modest fine when I looked at it, and I think it's public information, so we will share it with you and anyone else that wants to review it. It's available.
Councillor, anything else?
Yeah, thank you. To clarify, not so much interested in what the fine amount is. I think it's about 146, 130, like around between 100 and 150-ish in that range. My question is more so, of the 300 violations, I'm wondering if we can follow up with HPS and ask, have any demerit, like what is the actual charge being issued?
Yeah, for sure, and where there are multiple charges issued in one instance. So combined fines.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. That can be asked, and we'll see what comes back. And the other question is about ASE for truck routes. So automated speed enforcement can only be deployed in community safety zones, and is also about speeding. But the same technology that's taking license plate photos when a driver's speeding could also be used for truck route violation, I'm assuming. Just a question about what's possible in terms of automated enforcement. Understanding it would have to be tied to community safety zones under current provincial legislation, but what are our tools in that toolbox, potentially, given that it's unreasonable or unlikely that there's going to be an HPS officer every time we need there to be an HPS officer on some of these roadways?
So through the chair, before I defer the ASE element to our transportation folks online, I do want to be clear though, trucks can deviate from the truck route network if they're making a delivery. So to rely on an automatic enforcement tool on something that they may or may not, our fundamental question has always been, does that truck belong there? And although it may be a nuisance to the community, it may actually be a credible delivery. So I think that's a fine line we kind of have to understand if we go down that avenue. But from here, I'll just sip it and let the Transportation Division answer.
Transportation Division online.
Good morning, Carolyn Ryle, Director of Transportation. Happy New Year, everyone. So, Councillor, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding your question. So you were wondering if automated speed enforcement under the current definition of the Highway Traffic Act could be used to assist with trucks speeding. Is it on truck routes or off truck routes?
So I can give all the Millgrove heat mapping, all the Flamborough heat mapping is right beside the quarry. It's all on concession 4. It's very clear what is happening on that road. It's not multiple violations. It's one truck generator and the road that's not on the truck route directly adjacent to it. And so given that that's a hotspot in the Millgrove area, it's mentioned in the report that Millgrove's kind of the tertiary hotspot in the city. We have a general sense of, we understand the 2 or 3 problems that are contributing to that being our third hotspot. One of them is the proximity of the quarry and not following the truck route, presumably, given that it's concession 4 that we're seeing all the way on. That's where the question's coming from. So to what extent could ASE be used in terms of truck route violations in any, like, to what extent can ASE be used in our toolkit?
Okay, so it's a good question. The use of ASC under the Highway Traffic Act has a very specific definition of where the ASC equipment can be used in community safety zones, school zones. So it has to fall into the definition of what's in the Highway Traffic Act. So putting it beside a quarry, for example, or using it in the vicinity of a quarry, that wouldn't fall under the current definition of the Highway Traffic Act. So we couldn't be implementing ASC to deal with, you know, truck speeding and violating in that area. However, if there is speeding occurring on the road, that is something we can talk offline about. We can talk about, you know, what else may be in the area, because I don't know what else is in the area of the quarry with regards to maybe it falling somewhat into the definition or not. Looking for additional HPS support or other tools like we've been talking about, especially with the rural assignment we're going to be doing, are things that we'll be looking to strategize on and be bringing that back through that further report. If there are issues happening with one specific quarry, it's fair to say I'd recommend that we have conversations with that quarry. You probably, and staff may have already had that, may have already done that, but that would be an initial recommendation I'd put on the table, is a meeting with certain representatives from city staff with the quarry on feedback we're receiving. And we could always monitor speeds on that road to confirm if speeding actually is occurring, if that hasn't been done as well in addition.
Councillor, are you satisfied with that to take it offline?
Thanks. I appreciate the answer. I do think, for example, the Middletown Road area has just been added as an ASE. So I think, and we're talking about adding ASE in coming years. So I don't think this is so much a hypothetical as there's one of the hotspots is a community safety zone is the piece of the action. So as that ASE comes on, say in 2028, a truck's driving through, it's not speeding, but it shouldn't be there. We're going to catch the person speeding at 60. Is there a way to use that same ASE that's coming to enforce? We're already paying for it. It's already coming. It's not a new piece. And I'm seeing a head shake that no, under current legislation, that's not how it's set up. That's all. That's what I was looking for. Oh, I really do appreciate that. Yeah, I think my last piece in just echoing the desire, going back to Councillor Craig Cassar and Councillor Cameron Critch's, kind of how do we engage the community, both in terms of what should the priorities be, but also what are we doing to work on those priorities. I would certainly value that, as I think we have smaller fixes across the city. Like there, I think other councillors have tried to stay away the ward specific pieces, but sometimes we have these hotspots that are quick fixes, and then sometimes we have more systemic issues as well. And I really do see the value in having a wish list or an action list kind of broken down more specifically across the city, so we can prioritize those actions and see what's maybe most urgent, but then see what's a quick fix and move some of those quick fixes along while we're also working on the urgent issues as well. So I think all this data is really, really great. Excited for some of those motions I've heard about to kind of get us into that, how are we checking things off the list mode. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. I'm hearing a common theme across the questions and comments. So we'll take that for what it is, and hopefully we can move forward in that direction. At this point, I'd just like to move the report first, and then we can have further comments to the report, because we're just still dealing with the presentations. Is that fair? And then we'll come back to you, Councillor Wilson. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? I guess Councillor Jackson, Councillor Cassar, thank you. Is there any further discussions on the report? Councillor M. Wilson.
Thank you. I would really like to thank Councillor Alex Wilson for the question about delving into the 300. Obviously, we have no governing responsibility or direction with respect to the Hamilton Police Service. But I think if we're able to daylight that number of what does enforcement look like, it would provide us with an opportunity to underscore in our communication with Hamilton Police Service how critical this is to uphold council's priorities of livability and safety. So it shouldn't be the cost of doing business. So where I'm going with this is it's obviously up to Councillor Wilson, but if it could come in the form of a motion so that we don't lose it, and also so that our colleagues who sit on Public Works when they're going through their public works agenda, they can see, oh, that is coming. And a lot of community members who do follow the actions of this subcommittee, that they know that it's coming and we can have clear sight on it. I would appreciate that, but obviously it's Councillor Wilson's choice.
Councillor Wilson, any comments? A. Wilson?
Clerk Gauthier beat Councillor Maureen Wilson to that suggestion, and I am working on language over email as we speak.
Thank you. Is there any other comments in regards to the report?
Yeah, I just had the motion at the appropriate time to move that I've circulated to the committee. So if that would be that time, I would do that.
Okay, so I'll seek support from the clerk to find out when that time would be appropriate. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So moved by myself, looking for a seconder. Councillor Cretch.
Councillor Cretch.
I split second. That staff be directed to report back to the Truck Route Subcommittee in Q2 2025 with a proposed public-facing dashboard to A, clearly communicate the objectives of the Truck Route Master Plan and goods movement strategy and the benefits achieved from their successful execution. B, evaluate the performance over time. And C, actions required or underway to close the gap between results and objectives. So just to what I had said before, I think there's lots of data being gathered. It's just not being synthesized into a way that's easily digestible and also in a way that we can hold ourselves accountable to as here's what we're trying to achieve and here's how we're pacing towards those objectives. So it's pretty simple.
Any comments? Councillor Jackson.
Chair Tadison, am I voting on the report with the motion, or is this an amendment? Is this a second motion? I'm a simpleton. I'm very confused right now.
At this point right now, I think we're just voting on this motion.
This motion?
Through the chair, you'd be voting on this amendment to the
Oh, it's an
report.
amendment. I didn't hear that word.
Yes.
It's an amendment to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're voting on the amendment to the motion at this point. Amendment to the report. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so it'll be a show of hands to support this. Is there last final opportunity to make any suggestions? Not seeing any desire. We're voting on the amendment to the report at this time. Okay, all those in favor? Unanimous. So saying that then, do we now need to vote for the report?
Through the chair, I
Okay.
think we also have an amendment from Councillor A. Wilson.
Okay, let's go to the amendment to the report from Councillor A. Wilson.
Thank you. It's moved by myself, and I'm going to lean on Councillor Maureen Wilson as a seconder, that staff follow up with Hamilton Police Services requesting a further breakdown of the enforcement numbers shared within this report. That breakdown, you know, for example, what charges or fines were issued, or what's the breakdown of that actual number?
Okay, thank you. Any comments? Any questions? Seeing none, we'll vote on the second amendment to the report at this time. All in favor? Unanimous. That carries.
Through the chair, if there's no further discussion, the next vote will be to receive the presentation and the report as amended.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, as the clerk just said. Oh, we have a discussion. Go ahead.
It's Councillor Jackson, but thanks for saying go ahead, Chair Tadison. Is it possible that maybe, first of all, I hope the Truck Route Subcommittee won't wait till the end of this term, another 2 years before we meet. I appreciate all the work staff did. I'm not here to waste anyone's time to just come forward so that we meet, say hello to each other, but you got nothing to report on. I appreciate that, but 2 years is a long time. And secondly, maybe the thought of a representative from Hamilton Police Services, Chair Tadison, at a future Truck Route Subcommittee that could answer those enforcement questions that, to me, is unfair to Manager Malloy and Director Hollingworth when we get into, the deeper dive of police enforcement questions and what Councillor A. Wilson's amendment has requested. Just a thought. I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
Thanks. I think staff have heard that direction. We'll probably move forward with that without any motions necessary. Okay, thanks. So I guess at this point right now, we're receiving the presentation and supporting the report as amended twice. At this time, let's have a vote. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. That vote carries. So moving on to the next section, it's items for consideration. Amendments to the outstanding business list. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the amendments to the outstanding business list? Councillor Kretsch and Councillor Cassar. Let's have that vote now. All in favor? Unanimous. That vote was carried. Looks like I'm jumping over to section 15, adjournment. There being no further business, this meeting is now adjourned at the time that it is. And I don't have anything in front of me. 12:11, thank you. We are done. And